In the middle of a blinding Minnesota snowstorm, two frozen figures stood trembling beyond a lonely farm gate. An elderly father and his frightened daughter were running from someone who refused to let them escape. Inside the farmhouse, retired Navy SEAL Everett Rourke lived alone with his loyal German shepherd, Omen. When Omen suddenly raised his head and stared toward the gate, Everett knew something was wrong. The old man and his daughter asked for only one thing, to sleep inside the abandoned livestock barn until morning.
The night.
Everett refused, but not for the reason they feared. No human being would sleep beside animals while his house still had a fire. Tell us where you are watching from, and please like and subscribe to help us reach million subscribers and keep these stories alive. By late afternoon, North Star Valley had disappeared. The storm came down from the Canadian border without warning, swallowing the northern Minnesota fields beneath curtains of white. Snow moved sideways across the open land, striking the barn walls with a dry hiss of sand. Fence posts vanished one by one. The narrow road leading to Northglass Farm became a pale, shapeless stretch that seemed to lead nowhere at all. Everett Rourke finished checking the last horse shortly before darkness settled over the valley. At 59, Everett stood just under 6'1", with the broad shoulders and compact strength of a man whose body had been shaped by military service and preserved by years of honest labor. His square face was weathered rather than old, the skin tanned by wind, snow, and long days repairing fences under an open sky. Deep gray blue eyes rested beneath a heavy brow, watchful without appearing suspicious. His dark brown hair was cut short, though the top remained slightly uneven and was often swept backward by the northern wind. Silver had begun to gather at both temples. A neatly trimmed shadow of beard followed his jaw, softening none of its severity. He wore the same faded green military field jacket he had owned for years. Beneath it was a thick brown-gray flannel shirt, dark work trousers, and scarred leather boots whitened around the soles by road salt. A black-faced military watch rested against his left wrist. Everett no longer carried a weapon around the farm. He had lived through enough danger to understand that readiness was not the same thing as fear. Northglass Farm was quieter than most homes because no one waited inside it for him. There were horses in the stable, tools in the workshop, split wood beside the stove, and one other living creature who understood Everett's silences better than most people ever had. Omen lay near the barn door, his chin resting across his front paws. The 7-year-old German shepherd was large but lean, with long, balanced legs and the disciplined posture of a working dog. His coat was not the ordinary black and tan pattern Everett had seen in dozens of military dogs. Omen's lower body and chest were a deep honey gold, warm even beneath the blue winter light, while a dark saddle of black swept from his neck down his back and along his heavy tail. A narrow patch of pale gold, shaped like a rising flame, marked the center of his chest. His right ear carried a small V-shaped tear along the outer edge, the remnant of an old search operation before Everett had brought him home. His eyes were amber, touched with copper, unusually steady and often unsettling to people who preferred not to be observed too closely. Omen rarely barked without reason. He ignored loose shutters, distant coyotes, and the complaints of old wood under cold pressure. Even thunder earned little more than a lifted ear. That was why Everett stopped when Omen suddenly rose. The dog's head turned toward the northern gate. His ears stood forward, his body perfectly still, the long tail lowered behind him. He made no sound. Everett latched the final stall and watched him. "What is it?" Omen did not look back. The dog walked to the open barn doorway and stood facing the storm. Snow blew across the threshold, collecting against his paws. His nostrils moved as he tested the air, though the wind carried every scent in broken pieces. Everett felt the familiar tightening beneath his ribs. He had learned long ago that animals noticed trouble before people gave it a name. He pulled on his gloves, lifted a heavy flashlight from its hook, and stepped into the storm. Omen moved several paces ahead, then slowed to keep Everett within sight. The path from the barn to the northern gate was less than 200 yards, but the wind made every step feel uncertain. Snow erased their footprints almost as soon as they appeared. Everett could barely make out the black line of the fence. Then Omen stopped. Two figures stood beyond the gate. At first, they resembled fence posts bent beneath the weight of ice. Then one of them moved. The older man leaned heavily upon a handmade cane, his thin body bowed against the wind. Amos Bellamy was 81, tall enough that the years had not entirely hidden the size he once possessed. His back had curved with age and arthritis, yet a trace of old strength remained in his broad hands and square chin. Wisps of white hair clung beneath a navy knit cap. Thick white eyebrows shaded pale blue eyes that were clouded by exhaustion but still alert. He wore a long chestnut brown wool coat over a charcoal vest and a blue-gray flannel shirt. His trousers were dark with melted snow, and one black winter boot dragged slightly whenever he shifted his weight. The maple cane in his right hand had been carved and polished by years of use, its handle shaped to fit his palm. Beside him stood a woman who was trying to make herself into a wall. Laurel Bellamy, Amos's 47-year-old daughter, was about 5'6", slender beneath a worn forest green coat. Her pale face was oval, with faint freckles across the bridge of her nose, and gray-green eyes that might once have appeared gentle, but now moved constantly toward the road behind them. Chestnut hair, threaded with silver near the temples, had come loose from a low tie and clung wetly to her cheeks. A cream sweater showed beneath her coat. She wore a long charcoal wool skirt over dark thermal leggings and low brown winter boots that were soaked through. Laurel stood on the windward side of her father. Her body shook, but she kept one arm around Amos and used her own shoulder to shield his face from the snow. Everett opened the gate. "Are you hurt?" Amos lifted his head. Pride made him straighten, though his knees nearly fell beneath him. "No, sir." The answer came too quickly. Everett looked at Laurel. She avoided his eyes. "You have a vehicle?" Amos's jaw tightened. "Not anymore." A gust of wind struck them. Laurel stumbled and caught the gatepost with one hand. Omen stepped forward. Laurel recoiled at the sight of the large dog, but Omen stopped several feet away. He did not approach her directly. He turned slightly sideways, reducing the size of his body, and waited. Everett noticed the choice. So did Laurel. Amos cleared his throat. "We saw the barn from the road, or the light above it anyway." He glanced beyond Everett toward the shadowed outbuildings. "We don't mean to trouble you. We were wondering whether we might sleep in the unused livestock barn until morning." Laurel tightened her arm around her father. "Just until the storm passes," she added. Her voice was quiet and strangely measured, as if each word had to cross a guarded distance before leaving her mouth. "We won't touch anything." Everett turned his flashlight toward the old livestock barn. The structure was sound, but no animals had occupied it for years. There was no stove, no proper insulation, and no bedding except old straw stiffened by cold. On a night like this, the inside would not be much warmer than the field. "No," Everett said. Amos lowered his eyes, understood. He began to turn, placing the cane carefully into the snow. Laurel looked once toward the road. Fear, not disappointment, crossed her face. Everett caught Amos by the upper arm before he could take a second step. "I said you're not sleeping in the barn." The old man looked back. Everett nodded toward the farmhouse, where amber light shone through the kitchen windows. "No one sleeps with livestock while there's still a fire in my house." For a moment, neither Amos nor Laurel moved. The storm filled the silence for them. Then Omen turned and began walking toward the farmhouse, as if the decision had already been made. Inside, the warmth seemed to hurt them before it comforted them. Laurel's face tightened as sensation returned to her fingers. Amos stood just inside the door, dripping onto the floorboards, reluctant to move farther into another man's home. Everett took their coats and hung them near the stove. He gave Amos a thick blanket and placed another around Laurel's shoulders. The kitchen smelled of pine smoke, coffee, saddle soap, and the stew Everett had left warming near the back of the stove. The room was simple but cared for. Copper pans hung above the sink. A scarred oak table stood near the window. A framed black and white photograph of Everett's younger brother rested on a shelf, though Everett had turned it slightly away from the room years ago and never corrected it. Amos lowered himself into a chair with a quiet groan. Laurel did not sit until Everett pulled another chair close to her father. Even then, she positioned herself between Amos and the rest of the kitchen. Everett noticed. He also noticed how she tracked his hands whenever he reached for something. "I'm making tea," he said before touching the kettle. The warning seemed unnecessary, yet Laurel's shoulders loosened by a fraction. Omen entered and lay near the stove. Steam rose faintly from the wet fur along his back. Everett placed cups on the table. "Everett Rourke." Amos accepted the introduction with a tired nod. "Amos Bellamy. This is my daughter, Laurel." Laurel looked up briefly. "Thank you for letting us in." Her gratitude carried the careful tone of someone who believed kindness might be withdrawn if she used too much of it. Everett poured the tea. When Laurel reached for her cup, the sleeve of her cream sweater slipped back. Dark bruises circled her left wrist. Not one bruise, several. Some were yellowing at the edges. Others remained deep purple. Their shape was too narrow and regular to have come from falling against a table or catching herself on ice. Laurel saw Everett looking. She pulled the sleeve down. "I bruise easily." Everett did not challenge the lie. People rarely lied about pain because they wanted to deceive. More often they lied because the truth had once made things worse. Omen rose and approached Laurel. She stiffened. The dog stopped before touching her. He turned sideways and sat beside her chair, leaving several inches between his shoulder and her knee. Laurel watched him. Omen looked toward the stove rather than directly at her, granting her the dignity of making the next choice. After several seconds, Laurel lowered one hand. Her fingers barely touched the fur at his neck. Omen did not move. Then the dog's head lifted sharply. Omen turned away from Laurel's hand and pressed his nose against the right pocket of her discarded green coat. A low, uneasy sound formed in his throat. Not a growl, but a soft whine Everett had heard only when Omen sensed physical distress. Laurel went pale. "That's where he keeps them," she whispered. Everett looked from the coat to her face. "Keeps what?" "My medicine." The answer changed the room. Everett brought the coat to the table and asked permission before reaching into the pocket. Laurel nodded. Inside was a small plastic pill organizer. 2 compartments were empty. The remaining tablets had been mixed together without labels. Everett did not pretend to identify them. "When did you last take your heart medication?" 2 days ago, I think." "You think?" Laurel pressed her fingers against the silver maple leaf pendant at her throat. "The pills look different sometimes. Vaughn says the pharmacy changes the manufacturer." Amos's hands tightened around his cup. "He keeps the bottles." Everett sat opposite them. "Who is Vaughn?" Amos's expression hardened with shame. "Vaughn Calder. He manages our accounts, our bills, the orchard paperwork." "At first," Laurel added. "Only at first." The story came slowly. After an ice storm damaged part of Bellamy Maple Orchard, Vaughn had helped negotiate a loan. He had taken over correspondence with the bank, then insurance, then taxes. When Amos struggled to hear conversations over the telephone, Vaughn began speaking for him. Later, he began deciding which letters mattered, then which appointments mattered, then which medicines Laurel should take. That morning, Vaughn had locked the keys to their truck in his office and taken both telephones. He told Amos that a temporary care facility would send someone the following day. "I never agreed to leave," Amos said. Laurel stared into her tea. He said agreement wasn't necessary anymore. They had escaped through the rear mudroom after dark. They walked because every neighbor within reach either worked with Vaughn or believed he was helping them. Everett listened without interrupting. He did not promise to fix their lives. Men who made promises too quickly often wanted to own the outcome. "Tonight you're staying here," he said. "In the morning we'll find out what papers he has and what those papers actually allow him to do." Amos studied him. "Why?" Everett looked toward Omen, who remained beside Laurel's chair. "Because you asked for a barn when you needed a door." Near midnight, the telephone rang. Laurel flinched so violently that tea spilled across the table. Omen rose at once. Everett answered. The man on the line introduced himself as Vaughn Calder. His voice was controlled, educated, almost courteous. He explained that Amos suffered from confusion and that Laurel had become unstable after failing to follow her medication plan. "Everett," he said, "might be interfering with lawful care." Vaughn did not threaten him. He did something more effective. He spoke as though the matter had already been settled. "I'll come tomorrow morning," Vaughn said. "I'll bring the necessary records and someone from the county. I'm sure once you understand the situation, you'll cooperate." Everett's gaze remained on Laurel. Her hands shook beneath the blanket. Her breathing shortened. She looked not like a guilty person, but like someone hearing a lock turn on a door no one else could see. "You can bring whatever records you have," Everett said, "but no one leaves this house unless they choose to." A brief silence followed. Then Vaughn said, "You don't know them." "No," Everett replied, "but I know what no sounds like." He ended the call. Omen crossed the room and placed his body between Laurel and the telephone mounted on the wall. The dog stood there silently, broad chest forward, torn ear raised. Laurel stared at him. Then she covered her face and began to cry without making a sound. Later, after Everett prepared the small guest room and made a bed for Amos near the stove, the old man remained seated at the kitchen table. The storm had weakened. Snow tapped gently against the windows. Amos looked older in the quiet. "If Vaughn has papers that can turn our truth into the words of confused people," he asked, "does the truth still have any value?" Everett rested one hand on the back of the empty chair. Across the room, Omen lay beside Laurel's door. The truth has value, Everett said, but sometimes it needs witnesses. Outside, the northern gate disappeared beneath the falling snow. Inside, for the first time that night, no one was ordered to leave. Morning revealed what the storm had hidden. North Star Valley lay beneath a hard blue sky, every field smoothed into white silence. Ice coated the cottonwood branches along the road, catching the pale sunlight until the trees appeared to have been carved from glass. Smoke rose straight from the chimney of Northglass Farm. The wind had fallen, but the cold had deepened, pressing against the windows with the stillness of something waiting. Everett Rourke had been awake since before dawn. He had cleared the porch, checked the horses, and salted the path between the farmhouse and the barn. Yet the ordinary work did little to quiet the unease that had settled into him overnight. Amos Bellamy sat near the stove wearing one of Everett's spare flannel shirts beneath his chestnut coat. The old man held his maple cane across his knees and watched the window as though expecting the road to speak first. Laurel stood at the kitchen counter, attempting to butter toast. Her hands were steadier than they had been the night before, but every sound from outside made the knife pause. Omen lay between her and the front door. The German shepherd appeared relaxed. His honey-gold paws crossed beneath his chest, but his amber eyes remained open. The torn edge of his right ear shifted whenever the house creaked. At 9:17, a black SUV appeared at the end of the drive. It moved slowly over the newly plowed road, polished bodywork dark against the snow. The vehicle stopped several yards from the porch, positioned so that its front faced the gate rather than the house. Everett noticed the choice. A man who expected trouble parked for escape. Vaughn Calder stepped from the driver's side. At 51, Vaughn stood close to 6 feet, with a solid frame softened by a life spent behind desks, rather than working the land he claimed to understand. His round face was clean-shaven, his skin pale and untouched by winter wind. Dark blonde hair streaked with gray had been combed straight back and remained almost perfectly arranged despite the cold. He wore a charcoal overcoat tailored to fit his shoulders, a gray V-neck sweater, black trousers, and polished winter boots. A burgundy scarf lay neatly around his neck. His hands, when he removed his black leather gloves, were clean and carefully maintained. Vaughn did not resemble a man who broke doors. He resembled the man who brought papers explaining why the door no longer belonged to you. 2 people climbed out behind him. The first was a young assistant named Clara Mays, 28, small and sharp-featured, with straight blonde hair tied into a severe knot. She wore rectangular glasses, a navy wool coat, and carried a leather folder pressed against her chest. Clara had the careful expression of someone accustomed to recording other people's lives without becoming part of them. The second was Martin Hale, a private care coordinator in his early 40s. He was tall but narrow-shouldered, with sandy hair, a clean face, and tired hazel eyes. His padded blue jacket bore the logo of a regional home care company. Martin did not appear cruel. If anything, he looked uncomfortable, as though he had expected a routine collection and had begun to suspect he had been told only half the story. Everett stepped onto the porch before Vaughn reached the first stair. Omen came with him and stopped at his left side. Vaughn looked at the dog, then at Everett. "Mr. Rourke." His voice was the same as it had been on the telephone. Measured, courteous, carrying the confidence of someone who believed calmness itself was proof of innocence. "I appreciate your cooperation. I haven't offered any." The answer did not disturb Vaughn's smile. "I understand you're concerned. That speaks well of you." He held out a folder. Everett did not take it immediately. "What is it?" "Documentation." Only then did Everett accept the folder. Inside were copies of a financial power of attorney, a cognitive assessment, an application for emergency guardianship, and several incident reports describing Laurel as non-compliant with medication. One report claimed she had left a stove burning. Another alleged she had attempted to drive Amos during a medical episode. Laurel appeared in the doorway, behind Everett. At the sight of Vaughn, the color left her face. Omen turned at once. He did not growl, but his body shifted until he stood between Laurel and the porch steps. Vaughn noticed. "Good morning, Laurel." She did not answer. Vaughn looked past her toward Amos. "Mr. Bellamy, I'm glad to see you're safe." Amos came forward slowly, cane striking the floorboards with deliberate force. "You knew where we were." Vaughn sighed with gentle disappointment, as though Amos were a child refusing medicine. "I knew where you were likely to go." "That is not the same thing." Everett opened the cognitive report. "Who examined him?" Dr. Owen Mercer. Amos leaned closer. I never met anyone by that name. Clara's eyes flickered toward Vaughn, but her face quickly settled. Vaughn folded his gloves together. Memory loss is part of the concern. The sentence was delivered so smoothly that for one dangerous second, it threatened to replace Amos's own certainty. Everett had seen this technique before, not in courtrooms, but in interrogations, conducted by men who never raised their voices. Make the other person defend something obvious, then treat the defense itself as evidence of instability. Everett took out his phone. I'm calling the sheriff. Vaughn's smile thinned. That won't be necessary. It is to me. Sheriff Maeve Donnelly answered on the fourth ring. Maeve was 53, a broad-shouldered woman, with dark red hair, threaded with silver and pale skin, marked by freckles earned under decades of Minnesota sun. Her voice carried little patience for performance. She had grown up in the valley and knew which families had feuded for generations, which roads flooded first, and which respectable men became less respectable when no witnesses were present. Everett explained the situation and read the document numbers aloud. Maeve asked to speak with Vaughn. He took the phone with visible reluctance. For several minutes, he answered in short, controlled phrases. When he returned the phone, Maeve spoke directly to Everett. The guardianship application has been filed but not approved. There's no judicial order authorizing removal. The financial power of attorney does not give him physical custody. Everett watched Vaughn while Maeve continued. If Mr. Bellamy is oriented and says he wants to remain there, nobody takes him anywhere without another lawful basis. Same for Miss Bellamy. Understood. Everett ended the call. Vaughn's expression remained composed, but something in his eyes hardened. Everett turned to Amos. Do you want to leave with Mr. Calder? No. The word came without hesitation. Everett looked at Laurel. She pressed her fingers against the silver maple leaf at her throat. No. Vaughn gave a quiet breath through his nose. Amos is being influenced by his daughter. Laurel has not been taking medication correctly, and her judgment cannot be relied upon. Martin Hale shifted uneasily beside the SUV. Mr. Calder, he said, I was told there was an approved placement order. Vaughn did not look at him. There are procedural details still being completed. Martin's face changed. Not dramatically, but enough. He took one step away from the porch, distancing himself from the matter. Everett handed the folder back. You need to leave. Vaughn accepted it slowly. He placed each page in precise order before closing the cover. Then he looked at Laurel. Do you remember the last time you lost control? Her breathing stopped. The question entered her like a blade hidden in cloth. Laurel's hand dropped from the pendant, her eyes unfocused. She stepped backward, knocking against the doorframe. Omen moved before Everett did. The dog turned completely away from Vaughn and pressed his shoulder against Laurel's legs, giving her something solid to feel without trapping her. She gripped the thick fur at his neck, watched with a small, almost satisfied stillness. Everett stepped down from the porch. Go. For the first time, Vaughn called him by his full name. Everett Rourke, you are involving yourself in matters you do not understand. The loss of courtesy was slight but unmistakable. Everett held his gaze. That may be true. You still need to leave. Vaughn replaced his gloves one finger at a time, turned, and walked back to the SUV. Clara followed, though she glanced once toward Amos. Martin remained behind for a moment. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I should have verified the order. Amos looked at him. Yes, the old man said. You should have. Martin accepted the rebuke and returned to the vehicle. The SUV reversed down the drive without spinning a tire. Only after it disappeared did Laurel release Omen's fur. Her knees weakened. Everett caught her elbow while Amos reached for her other hand. I don't remember, she whispered. What he said happened. I don't remember it. No one told her to calm down. No one told her memory was wrong. They simply brought her inside. Ruth Keene arrived shortly after noon in a county sedan dusted with salt. At 58, Ruth was a sturdy woman of medium height, with warm brown skin, short gray curls, and dark eyes that missed very little. She wore a practical plum-colored winter coat over a cream blouse and dark slacks. A canvas bag hung from one shoulder, filled with forms, bottled water, and the quiet tools of a person who had spent 20 years entering homes where kindness and control often wore the same face. Ruth worked for Adult Protective Services. She did not begin by questioning Everett. She asked him to leave the kitchen. Then she interviewed Amos and Laurel separately. Amos sat with Ruth at the oak table while Everett waited in the barn. Ruth asked him the date, the name of the president, the location of his property, the size of his orchard. and what he understood about Vaughn's authority. Amos answered steadily. He forgot the exact day of the month, but correctly described the week, the season, the outstanding loan, and the consequences of signing away access through the eastern woods. When Ruth interviewed Laurel, she asked Everett, Amos, and even Omen to remain outside. Laurel described waking on the kitchen floor after several missing hours. Vaughn had told her she had threatened Amos with a carving knife. She remembered no knife. She remembered only the bitter taste of a pill and Vaughn speaking to someone on his phone. When the interviews ended, Ruth called everyone back. I cannot decide a guardianship case, she said, but I can document that both of you are here voluntarily and that Mr. Calder currently has no order permitting removal. She opened a formal investigation and arranged for medical evaluations. Laurel looked relieved, but not safe. Those were different things. As Ruth closed her bag, Omen rose from beside the stove and walked to Laurel's green coat. He ignored the pocket that had held the pills. Instead, he lowered his nose to the hem and followed it slowly along the lining. Then he stopped at one corner and scratched once. A faint sweet smell drifted from the fabric. Beeswax. Laurel stared at the coat. My mother used beeswax on sewing thread, she said. But she's been gone 12 years. The room went still. Everett placed the coat on the table. A narrow section of the lining had been stitched with thread slightly darker than the rest. Who repaired this, he asked. Laurel frowned, searching through memories that had become dangerous ground. Then her eyes widened. Lydia Cross. The name meant something to Amos, Vaughn's bookkeeper. She fixed the tear before she left town, Laurel said. She said it was too good a coat to lose. Amos gripped the head of his cane. She told me something before she went. I thought she was frightened. What did she say? Ruth asked. Amos looked at the coat. If they take everything, look at what Laurel carries through winter. Everett used a seam ripper from the kitchen drawer, working slowly so the fabric would not tear. Inside the lining was a small packet wrapped in waxed cloth. It contained a memory card. No one treated it as a miracle. Omen had followed a scent. Lydia had left the clue, but Laurel lowered herself into a chair and looked at the dog, as though he had returned something she did not yet understand she had lost. Everett called Gideon Shaw. Gideon arrived before sunset in a battered brown pickup. At 56, he was a thick-bodied man with a slightly crooked nose, close-cropped black hair graying at the temples, and a short salt-and-pepper mustache. His dark eyes looked permanently tired until they settled on a detail that mattered. He wore a tobacco-brown canvas jacket over a denim shirt and carried a black notebook in his breast pocket. Years as a military investigator had taught him to distrust both perfect stories and expensive coffee. He examined the memory card at Everett's desk. Encrypted, he said. Can you open it? Gideon glanced at him. I can also fix a tractor, bake bread, and sing church hymns. The question is whether you want any of those things done well. It was the first joke Laurel had heard since arriving. A faint smile appeared and vanished. While Gideon worked, another vehicle reached the farm. Meredith Sloan entered carrying a cognac-colored legal case. She was 44, tall and slender, with olive-toned skin, dark brown eyes, and black hair cut cleanly at her jaw. Her navy winter coat was practical rather than fashionable, and a plain silver ring rested on her right index finger. Meredith had spent years representing older adults whose signatures had been obtained through pressure, confusion, or fear. She did not offer sympathy before facts. She offered attention. She reviewed Vaughn's copies beside Ruth. The guardianship petition has not been heard, she said, and this assessment is questionable. She tapped the doctor's signature. Different city, no attached clinical notes, no date of direct examination. Amos leaned forward. I never met him. Meredith underlined the name once. Then we begin there. By evening, Gideon recovered part of the memory card. A spreadsheet appeared on Everett's computer screen. It listed management fees, consulting charges, and transfers to a recently formed company called Alder Corridor Holdings. The company's ownership disappeared behind layers of registration, but its mailing address matched a private box used by Vaughn's office. Gideon opened a second file. A survey map filled the screen. A narrow marked strip began at the highway, crossed the eastern edge of Bellamy Maple Orchard, and ended at Alder Lake. Gideon placed one finger on the route. He isn't trying to take the farmhouse. Amos stared at the line cutting through his trees. Gideon's voice became quiet. He needs a road through your land. The morning road to town glittered like polished bone. Sunlight lay bright across North Star Valley, but the temperature had fallen well below zero. Snowbanks rose as on both sides of the highway, their upper edges sharpened by wind. Everett drove slowly, keeping both hands on the wheel whenever the truck crossed patches of black ice. Amos sat in the passenger seat, with his maple cane between his knees. Laurel rode in the back beside Omen. The German shepherd occupied the floor rather than the seat, his broad honey-gold chest pressed lightly against Laurel's boots. He did not lean on her. He simply remained close enough for her to know where he was. Every few minutes, Laurel touched the silver maple leaf at her throat. Everett saw the motion in the rearview mirror. She said a doctor would prove I wasn't right, Laurel said quietly. No one needed to ask who she meant. Amos turned as far as his stiff neck allowed. You are right. Laurel looked out at the white fields. That isn't the same as being believed. Everett did not offer reassurance he could not guarantee. He had learned that false comfort was only fear wearing a kinder coat. We're going to find out what the evidence says, he replied. The North Star family clinic stood between a farm supply store and a low brick library. It was a modest one-story building with blue trim, a wheelchair ramp cleared of snow, and a wooden sign that had been repainted so many times the carved letters had softened. Dr. Celeste Harrow met them in the examination room. At 62, Celeste was a slender woman with warm brown skin, silver-threaded black hair gathered into a low knot, and dark eyes made gentler, but not less perceptive, by thin-framed glasses. She wore a white coat over a soft blue sweater and moved with the calm economy of someone who had spent decades learning that frightened patients noticed every hurried gesture. Celeste had grown up in the valley and returned after medical school because her father had died waiting for an ambulance during a February storm. The loss had left her with little patience for delays disguised as procedure, and even less for people who confused authority with care. She greeted Amos first, then Laurel, not Everett, not the dog, the patient. Would you like Mr. Rourke to remain? She asked Laurel. Laurel hesitated before nodding. And your father, yes. Celeste then looked at Omen. The dog? Laurel's hand lowered toward his head. Him too. Omen lay beneath the examination table, his torn right ear visible against the pale floor. Celeste began with Laurel's wrists. She rolled the sleeves back slowly and paused whenever Laurel's breathing changed. The bruises formed uneven bands around both arms. Some had faded to yellow. Others remained dark violet, the shapes narrow enough to suggest fingers rather than a single impact. Celeste documented them with measurements and photographs after obtaining permission. Near Laurel's left elbow, she found a small puncture mark beneath a fading patch of discoloration. Do you remember an injection? Laurel stared at the mark. No. Any blood test recently? No. Celeste's expression did not change, but she wrote something in the chart. She listened to Laurel's heart, checked her blood pressure twice, tested her balance, and examined her pupils. Laurel's pulse skipped irregularly. Her mouth was dry. Her hands trembled when held out before her. Have you eaten normally? I thought I had. The answer carried more fear than uncertainty. Celeste ordered blood work and asked a nurse to bring water and crackers. While they waited, she examined the pill organizer recovered from Laurel's coat. The compartments contained tablets of different shapes and colors without original labels. These should never have been mixed like this, Celeste said. Laurel lowered her eyes. Vaughn said labels confused me. Celeste looked at her over the rim of her glasses. Did they confuse you before he removed them? Laurel said nothing. That silence answered more than words could have. The initial laboratory panel returned within the hour. Celeste closed the door before explaining. There is a sedative in your system. It is not listed in your active prescriptions. Amos gripped the head of his cane. What kind? A medication that can cause slowed thinking, dizziness, short-term memory loss, and poor coordination. Combined with the wrong dose of heart medication, it could be dangerous. Laurel's face went still. So the hours I lost, the medicine could explain them, Celeste said carefully. But this result does not tell us who gave it to you or how you received it. Everett appreciated the precision. She refused to turn suspicion into fact merely because it felt morally satisfying. Celeste continued, your prescribed heart medication is present, but at a lower concentration than expected. That could mean missed doses, reduced doses, or replacement with the wrong tablets. Laurel looked toward Amos. I told you I was forgetting. You were being made to forget, Amos said. Celeste interrupted gently. We do not know that yet. We know something is medically wrong. We will preserve what we can prove. She called the local pharmacy. Nolan Price arrived 20 minutes later, carrying a hard plastic evidence bag and a tablet computer. Nolan was 50, broad through the chest, with a close-cropped iron-gray beard and a receding line of sandy hair. His face had the square, dependable shape of a man people trusted with private worries. He wore a dark green pharmacy vest over a plaid shirt, and his fingers bore faint stains from years of repairing antique clocks in the back room of his shop. After his wife survived an accidental medication interaction, Nolan had become meticulous to the point of irritation, an inconvenience to careless people and a blessing to frightened ones. He examined the pills without touching them directly. These did not come from my pharmacy in this container. He compared the tablets with Laurel's dispensing history. The heart medication we issued last month was white and scored. These are pale blue and unscored. Celeste pointed to 2 round tablets. And these? Nolan's jaw tightened. Not prescribed to Miss Bellamy through us. He checked the printed sticker on the organizer. This label has been recreated. The font is wrong, and the prescription number belongs to a discontinued antibiotic from 3 years ago. Laurel stared at the box. For months, she had treated it as proof of her own failure. Now it sat beneath the fluorescent light looking cheap, ordinary, and false. Nolan sealed the organizer and the remaining pills in separate bags. He wrote the date, time, and names of those present across the labels. "I'll turn these over directly to Sheriff Donnelly," he said. "Testing should identify the exact medication and lot." Omen lifted his head as Laurel began to breathe faster. The dog stood, moved to her side, and sat with his body angled away from her. Laurel rested her palm against the pale, flame-shaped patch on his chest. Celeste opened Laurel's electronic chart and frowned. A prescription change appeared on the screen. Entered 6 weeks earlier, under the credentials of a medical assistant who had left the clinic the previous spring. The entry had been made at Haizo Muiba in the morning. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then Laurel whispered, "I was asleep at 2 in the morning." Celeste looked at the screen, her face suddenly harder. So was this clinic. Celeste did not click further through the altered record. Instead, she called the hospital network's information security office and requested that the access logs be preserved. She explained that the clinic could identify an unauthorized entry, but not the person behind it. The login could have been stolen. The device location and network address would require technical review and, most likely, a lawful request from investigators. Everett watched Laurel's shoulders lower slightly. The answer was incomplete, but it existed outside her memory. Something had happened. Something measurable. That mattered. Amos underwent his own cognitive evaluation next. Celeste asked Laurel, Everett, and Omen to wait outside while she interviewed him privately. She tested his understanding of time, location, money, property, and consequences. Amos forgot the exact date by 1 day. He needed a question repeated because of his hearing. Yet he correctly described the acreage of Bellamy Maple Orchard, the remaining loan balance, the location of the eastern access road, and what would happen if he surrendered permanent passage across his land. When Celeste finished, she invited everyone back. "Mr. Bellamy has hearing loss and some normal age-related slowing," she said. "I see no evidence that he lacks the capacity to make decisions about his residence or property." Amos closed his eyes briefly. He did not smile. Relief came to him more like grief, the realization that someone had needed to certify his right to remain himself. While Celeste prepared the medical report, Everett called Meredith. The lawyer had spent the morning drafting an emergency petition. She requested that the court temporarily freeze all transactions involving Bellamy land, prevent Vaughn from relocating Amos, compel the return of medications and private correspondence, and authorize an independent capacity review. Ruth Keene supplied a sworn statement confirming that both Amos and Laurel had chosen to remain at Northglass Farm. By afternoon, Vaughn had filed his response. He accused Everett of isolating 2 vulnerable adults, interfering with medication, and exerting undue influence over Amos's property decisions. The filing did not describe Everett as violent. That would have been too easy to disprove. Instead, it described him as persuasive, a lonely former soldier with land, animals, and an unexplained interest in another family's estate. Meredith read the accusation over the telephone. "He's trying to make your help look like recruitment," she told Everett. "What do you need from me? Nothing dramatic. Do not speak for Amos or Laurel. Do not touch their money. Keep a record of every expense. Let Ruth and the doctors document that their choices are their own." Everett glanced toward the examination room. "I can do that. That is why he will dislike you," Meredith said. "You are difficult to turn into the story he needs." Back at Northglass Farm, Gideon was still working through the encrypted files. He had converted Everett's dining table into an investigation station. His black notebook lay beside two computers, a stack of printed corporate records, and a mug of coffee so dark, Amos asked whether it had once been used to stain furniture. Gideon found charges labeled consulting, winterization, emergency management, and document recovery. Several had been billed repeatedly for the same dates. Other files referenced shell companies whose ownership disappeared behind registered agents and mailing services. There were drafts relating to access rights, groundwater use, and timber removal. A list contained the names of 3 older clients who had previously hired Vaughn's firm. One had sold a lakeside parcel after being declared unable to manage finances. Another had moved out of state. The third was deceased. Nothing in the records plainly admitted fraud. Every sentence had been written to survive being read aloud in court. Lydia Cross had not left a confession. She had left fragments. Gideon believed that was deliberate. She expected someone else to finish the thought, he said. Near sunset, Meredith called again. A judge had granted a limited temporary order until a full hearing could be scheduled. No Bellamy land transaction could proceed. Vaughn could not remove Amos or control Laurel's medical care. Medication and mail had to be preserved. It was not victory. It was time. Laurel sat near the stove after dinner, Omen beside her chair. The light from the fire moved over the bruises on her wrists. What scares me most, she said, isn't that he hurt me. Everett waited. It's that he made everyone think my memory was the dangerous thing. She looked down at Omen. I don't know which parts are real. The dog raised his head but did not push closer. Laurel chose the distance herself. She placed both hands into the thick fur around his neck. Everett leaned against the kitchen counter. Then we don't ask your memory to stand alone, he said. We let the records, the blood tests, the pharmacy logs, and the people who saw things stand beside it. Laurel's eyes filled, but she did not look away. Late that evening, Gideon received a new corporate filing. He read it twice before calling everyone to the table. The proposed resort project had a financing deadline at the end of the month. If the developers failed to secure permanent access across the Bellamy property, investors could withdraw and the company would lose millions in deposits and penalties. Gideon circled the deadline. 10 days. That was all the time Vaughn had left. The temporary court order arrived just after sunrise. By 9 o'clock, 2 county vehicles, Meredith Sloan's sedan and Everett Rourke's truck, were moving along the narrow road toward Bellamy Maple Orchard. The winter day was almost painfully beautiful. Sunlight flashed across the snow in sheets of white fire. Rows of mature maple trees stood beneath the blue sky, their branches glazed with ice. Beyond them, the old red sugar house rested among the trunks, its chimney dark and silent. The Bellamy farmhouse appeared farther up the slope, a 2-story white structure with green shutters and a broad porch whose roof carried a smooth burden of snow. Amos stared it through Everett's windshield. The house had belonged to his parents before him. He had repaired the porch after his wedding, raised laurel beneath its roof, and buried his wife's favorite dog beneath the maple, nearest the kitchen window. Now he looked at the place as though it had betrayed him. Everett parked beside Sheriff Maeve Donnelly's vehicle. Maeve stepped out first. She wore a brown sheriff's coat over her uniform, a wool cap pulled over her dark red hair, and heavy black boots. The freckles across her pale face made her appear more approachable than she was. Her movements were economical, and her expression carried the practiced neutrality of someone who had learned that truth often became shy when authority entered a room too loudly. Beside her stood Deputy Aaron Cole. Aaron was 36, 5'9", with an athletic build shaped by long patrol shifts and weekend cross-country skiing. Her dark brown skin contrasted with the snow, and her tightly curled black hair was braided close to her scalp beneath a navy knit cap. A narrow scar crossed the point of her chin, the result of a childhood sledding accident she still blamed on her older brother. Aaron had a calm, direct manner and the habit of positioning herself where she could see every exit without making others feel watched. The final member of Maeve's team carried 2 hard equipment cases. Daniel Quist, the county's forensic evidence technician, was 49, slight and narrow-shouldered, with pale blonde hair thinning across the crown and a long face made gentler by light blue eyes. He wore wire-framed glasses and insulated coveralls beneath a gray winter coat. Daniel spoke softly, labeled everything twice, and trusted measurements more than memory. Years earlier, a poorly documented domestic abuse case had collapsed in court after evidence was mishandled. Since then, Daniel had treated every photograph, envelope, and fingerprint as though someone's future depended upon the details. Often, it did. Meredith and Ruth Keene joined them near the porch. Ruth carried her canvas bag and a legal pad. Meredith held the court order inside a waterproof folder. "This is a limited access order," Meredith reminded everyone. "We document conditions related to safety, medication, communications, and financial control. We do not search beyond the authorized scope." Maeve nodded. "No fishing expedition." Amos stood beside Everett, one gloved hand wrapped around his maple cane. Laurel remained close to Omen. The German shepherd's black and honey coat caught the morning light, and the pale flame-shaped patch on his chest seemed almost golden against the snow. Omen wore a plain leather leash held loosely in Everett's left hand. His amber eyes moved from the house to Laurel and back again. Everett looked at Amos. "Are you ready?" "No," Amos said. Then he walked toward the porch. The front door was unlocked. That frightened Laurel more than if it had been bolted. Inside, the air smelled stale and overheated. The curtains were drawn despite the bright morning. A single lamp burned in the parlor, casting weak yellow light over furniture that had not been moved but somehow no longer felt familiar. Daniel began photographing the entryway. Ruth documented the disconnected telephone first. The cord had not merely fallen loose. It had been removed and coiled inside a kitchen drawer beneath a stack of dish towels. On the counter stood a metal cash box with a combination lock. A camera the size of a matchbox was mounted above the hallway arch. Amos stopped beneath it. That wasn't there before. Laurel looked toward the dark lens. It was. Her voice had gone thin. "He told me it only recorded if I wandered at night." Ruth wrote down the statement but did not interpret it. Upstairs, they found the first electronic lock. It had been fitted to the outside of Amos' bedroom door. The keypad faced the hallway. There was no corresponding control inside. Maeve tested the latch without opening the door. "Who had the code?" Amos's jaw tightened. "Vaughn." Inside the room, the bed had been stripped. A wooden chair stood beneath the window. The lower sash had been screwed into the frame. Daniel photographed each screw before touching anything. Near the bed, the floor showed pale curved marks where the rubber tip of a cane had repeatedly dragged toward the door. Amos stared at them. Laurel moved closer, but he raised one hand, not to reject her, to keep himself standing. In Laurel's room, a white noise machine sat on a shelf near the shared wall. Its cord ran through a hole drilled into the hallway, where it could be switched on from outside. A small calendar hung beside the dresser. Different handwriting had altered medication times in blue ink. Several days were marked with a red letter. See, Laurel touched one of the dates. "That means confused." "Who wrote it?" Ruth asked. "I don't know." "Did you?" "No." The answer came stronger this time. Downstairs, Daniel opened the kitchen cabinets, only after Maeve confirmed they fell within the order's medical safety provisions. The prescription bottles were stored inside a locked plastic container. Some bore Laurel's name. Others had no labels. Ruth found unopened bank correspondence behind a row of baking pans. 3 envelopes carried warning notices. 2 had been slid open and resealed with clear tape. A stack of invoices showed charges from Vaughn's company for services Amos did not recognize. Overnight supervision, emergency transportation, property stabilization, and cognitive crisis response. Each item sounded official. Together, they felt like a language designed to make theft appear helpful. Everett watched Laurel move through the kitchen. She touched nothing. Even in her own childhood home, she waited for permission. That unsettled him, more than the locks. Omen stopped at the bottom of the staircase. He looked toward Laurel, then toward the narrow pantry door beside the kitchen. The dog did not pull on the leash. He simply sat and stared. Laurel's face changed. "My mother used to keep flour in there," she said. "Vaughn said the hinges were broken." Maeve opened the door. The hinges worked perfectly. Inside, there was no flour. Only a folding chair facing the wall, a battery lantern, and a small bell fixed high above the door, far beyond Laurel's reach when seated. No one spoke for several seconds. Then Amos whispered, "He put her in there." Laurel closed her eyes. "I thought it was only once." The sentence carried the terrible weight of someone discovering that memory had not exaggerated the cruelty. It had protected her from its full shape. Ruth took Laurel outside before the room was photographed. Omen followed them to the porch, then sat beside Laurel as she looked across the bright orchard. The day remained beautiful. That seemed obscene. Meredith stood nearby, but did not speak until Laurel did. He called it a quiet room. Meredith's expression tightened. "Do you want that statement documented today?" Laurel looked at her. Not yet. All right. There was no disappointment in Meredith's voice, only respect. Everett remained inside with Amos. The old man stood in the kitchen, one hand resting on the table his wife had chosen 40 years earlier. I let him into this house, Amos said. You let him help with a loan. I gave him the keys. You gave access to someone who claimed he deserved trust. Amos looked at Everett. That distinction sounds kinder than it feels. Everett understood. Guilt often preferred simple sentences because they made punishment easier. Maeve joined them. We're going to the sugar house next. Mr. Bellamy, you can stay here. No. Amos lifted his cane. If he hid something on my land, I'm going to see where. The sugar house stood several hundred yards downhill, a red timber building with a sloped metal roof and a stone chimney. The maple evaporator inside had not been used that winter. Copper pans hung above a long workbench. Bundles of tubing and tapping tools lined the walls. Omen entered under Everett's control. He moved slowly, nose close to the floor. Near the rear wall, he stopped beneath a section of paneling. The dog sniffed once, then again. Everett smelled it too when he stepped closer. Beeswax and machine oil. The same combination that had clung to the packet in Laurel's coat. A single board had newer nail heads than those around it. Everett pointed, but did not touch. Daniel photographed the wall, measured the board, and removed it using clean gloves and a marked tool. Behind it lay a small digital recorder wrapped in cloth and a narrow black notebook. Daniel bagged each item separately. The recorder was played only after Maeve documented its condition and verified the device could be powered without altering stored files. The first recording contained several minutes of silence. Then Vaughn's voice emerged, calm and close. You don't need to understand every page, Amos. You need to sign where I marked. Another fragment captured Laurel, asking for her medication. Vaughn told her she would receive it after she stopped agitating her father. In a third recording, he said, the house might need to be declared unsuitable if Amos continued resisting placement. None of the clips was a full confession. Each could be challenged. But together, they created a pattern. The notebook contained dates, payment amounts, abbreviations, and the names of intermediary companies. One line had been circled twice. Access matters more than ownership. Gideon arrived while Daniel was photographing the pages. He studied the entries without touching the notebook. The resort doesn't need to own the farmhouse, he said. It needs a permanent corridor from the highway to the lake, plus the right to draw water and remove timber along the route. Amos looked toward the window. Beyond the glass stood the eastern maples, planted by his grandfather. If they cut through there, the lower grove dies. Gideon nodded. And once access is permanent, the house can remain in your name, on paper. Vaughn can claim he never took your home. A dark sedan entered the orchard driveway. Vaughn stepped out with a lawyer. The lawyer, Thomas Wren, was 61, tall and bony, with silver hair combed flat, a long nose, and a black overcoat that hung from his frame like judicial robes. He had the restrained manner of a man who disliked surprises because surprises created unpaid hours. Vaughn did not cross the boundary Maeve established. He remained beside the car. The cameras were installed for safety, he said. The locks prevented wandering. Any recordings are fragments taken without context. Meredith held up the court order. Transactions remain frozen. No equipment, records, or property may be removed. Vaughn ignored her and looked at Laurel. You cannot remember last week, he said. Do you truly believe you will remember correctly in court? Laurel went still. Omen stood beside her, not in front of her. This time, Laurel did not step behind him. She met Vaughn's eyes. I will remember what I can. Her voice shook, but it did not disappear. And I will tell the truth about what I cannot. For the first time, Vaughn's composure showed a crack. Only a second. Then he turned away. On the drive back to Northglass Farm, Laurel told Meredith she wanted to testify when the time came. Meredith folded her hands over the legal case on her lap. You do not need a perfect memory to be credible, she said. You need honesty. Tell the court what you know, what you saw, and where your memory ends. That evening, Gideon traced a forwarding address connected to Lydia Cross. She was living with her older sister in Wisconsin. When he called, Lydia refused to speak. Her voice trembled as she said Vaughn had threatened to accuse her son of theft. Then the line went dead. At nearly the same hour, a motion alert appeared on Maeve's phone. A dark pickup had slowed outside Bellamy Maple Orchard, remained near the gate, and then turned away. Maeve assigned Aaron Cole to increase patrols around the property. Everett asked Caleb Dunn to help move the horses and remove fuel, dry hay, and valuable equipment from the sugar house area. Caleb arrived before nightfall. At 42, he was a compact, powerfully built man with close-cut auburn hair, a short copper beard, and green eyes made serious by old experience. He had served for 12 years as a volunteer firefighter until a warehouse collapse injured his left knee. The limp remained slight, but smoke still changed his expression. Caleb knew how quickly a building could become a grave and disliked anyone who treated fire as a threat instead of a living danger. Together, he and Everett began moving the most vulnerable animals to the front pasture. The following morning, Everett found an envelope inside the Northglass Farm mailbox. There was no stamp, no address, only his name, written in block letters. Inside was a single sentence: "Evidence burns faster than people." For 2 nights after the warning appeared, nothing happened. That silence was worse than noise. Bellamy Maple Orchard stood under a moonless sky, the trees pale and rigid beneath a crust of snow. The old sugar house had been cleared of fuel cans, dry hay, and most loose equipment. Caleb Dunn had spent the afternoon moving the most vulnerable horses to the front pasture, while Everett checked the freeze protection lines that ran between the barn and the outdoor troughs. The precautions made sense. They did not make the place feel safe. Maeve could not keep a deputy stationed at both Northglass Farm and Bellamy Orchard around the clock. Instead, the motion cameras at the orchard had been linked to Gideon's phone and the sheriff's dispatch system. Erin Cole adjusted her evening patrol route, so she passed the property twice after dark. Amos and Laurel remained at Northglass Farm. That had been Everett's condition. The original documents recovered from the house and sugar house were no longer lying around the property. Daniel Quist had already removed the recorder and Lydia's notebook. However, several sealed boxes of copied records and 2 pieces of electronic equipment remained inside a locked storage room, while the county arranged transport to a secure evidence facility. The labels on those boxes made them look more important than they were. Anyone watching from outside would not know the difference. Vaughn Calder did, or believed he did. A quarter-mile down the county road, a black SUV sat with its lights off behind a windbreak of spruce. Vaughn remained in the driver's seat, gloved hands resting on the wheel. The blue light from his phone sharpened the planes of his clean face and reflected faintly in his pale brown eyes. He did not tell anyone to burn a building. Men like Vaughn understood the value of sentences that could mean one thing before a crime and another after it. "Recover what belongs to us," he said into the phone, "and don't leave the site useful after tonight." On the other end, Travis Kern understood exactly what he wanted. Travis was 38, a heavy man with a thick neck, shaved head, and a short black beard that grew unevenly along an old scar near his jaw. His strength had come from years of lifting engines, hauling equipment, and doing work that paid cash, because employers did not ask many questions. He wore a brown insulated work coat over oil-stained coveralls. Anger sat close to the surface in him, not because he was fearless, but because rage had become the fastest way to hide humiliation. Gambling debts had taken his truck, then his savings, then the last part of his judgment. Lowell Vick stood beside him in the snow. At 32, Lowell was thin and restless, with narrow shoulders, pale skin, greasy black hair, and a pointed face made younger by uncertainty. He wore a cheap gray parka that was too large for him and kept rubbing his gloved hands together. Lowell preferred schemes that occurred in offices, online accounts, or empty warehouses. Open land made him nervous. So did fire. "You said we were getting files," Lowell whispered. Travis inserted a pry bar beneath the lock plate of the storage room. "We are." And then, Travis leaned his weight into the metal. The frame cracked. "Then there's nothing left worth coming back for." Lowell looked toward the dark tree line. "That isn't what he said." Travis laughed once. "He never says it." The camera above the east eave captured both men entering the building. 20 miles away, Gideon's phone vibrated against his kitchen table. He was still awake, reading corporate filings over coffee that had gone cold hours earlier. The alert showed 2 figures, one carrying a pry bar, the other a red plastic container. Gideon enlarged the image. Then he called dispatch. At the orchard, another alert reached Maeve. Erin Cole was 4 miles away. Everett and Caleb were already closer. They had been checking the trough heating system along the rear pasture when Gideon called. Omen stood in the bed of Everett's truck, beneath a secured canvas cover, alert before the engine even started. 2 men inside the sugar house, Gideon said through the speaker. Possible fuel container. Maeve's been notified. Everett looked at Caleb. Caleb's green eyes had already changed. The former firefighter did not need to be told what a fuel container meant inside an old timber building. Go, he said. Everett turned the truck toward the orchard. They did not use the main drive. Everett killed the headlights before reaching the lower access road and stopped behind the equipment barn. Caleb removed 2 extinguishers from the truck rack. Everett clipped Omen's leash to his collar. Stay close. Omen's amber eyes fixed on the sugar house. A faint smell of gasoline carried across the cold air. Inside the building, Travis kicked apart the first sealed carton. It contained duplicated bank statements. The second held photographed copies of invoices. No notebook, he said. Lowell searched the cabinet. There's nothing here. Travis looked toward the old timber wall. Then we make sure. He opened the fuel container. Lowell grabbed his sleeve. No. Travis shoved him backward. You think Calder forgets people who fail him? He owns your lease, your debt, and your brother's job. Walk away and see what's left by morning. Lowell released him. Fear did what loyalty never could. Travis poured a dark line of gasoline near the rear corner of the sugar house. The liquid soaked into the old boards and spread beneath a stack of empty crates. Lowell took a lighter from his pocket. His hand shook. Outside, Omen stopped. The dog's body lowered, ears forward, tail rigid behind him. Everett removed the leash but kept one hand near Omen's collar. A metallic click came from within. Omen exploded into one deep bark. Lowell spun toward the doorway. The lighter slipped from his fingers and landed in the snow that had blown across the threshold. The small flame vanished. Travis swore. He reached into his coat and pulled out a rag, wrapped around a short metal tool. The end was already burning from a pocket torch. Travis, don't. Lowell's plea came too late. Travis threw the rag toward the rear wall. Fire caught along the gasoline-darkened boards with a hungry orange rush. Caleb ran forward with the first extinguisher. Call it in as active structure fire. Everett relayed the update to dispatch, then moved toward the fuel shutoff line outside the sugar house. The old maple evaporator no longer operated, but a propane supply still fed the utility heater in the adjoining workroom. He turned the main valve closed. Caleb discharged white suppressant across the lower flames. The fire shrank, then reappeared farther along the baseboard where gasoline had run beneath the crates. Travis charged through the side door. He swung the pry bar at Everett. Everett stepped inside the arc, caught Travis's wrist with both hands, and drove the arm downward against his own shoulder. The pry bar dropped into the snow. Everett did not strike him. He used weight, balance, and leverage, turning Travis toward the wall. Lowell bolted for the orchard fence. Caleb intercepted him near the equipment shed. Lowell raised both hands before Caleb touched him. I'm done, he gasped. I'm done. A crash sounded from the adjoining horse shelter. Omen turned sharply. Smoke had reached a small side enclosure where an elderly roan mare named Maribel had been temporarily housed. The 23-year-old horse had a gray-red coat, a white blaze down her face, and the stiff hind legs of an animal that had survived neglect before coming to Everett. Maribel rarely panicked, but smoke had driven her against the gate. A loose nylon tie had wrapped around one foreleg. Omen ran toward the shelter, barking in short, urgent bursts. Everett glanced at the dog, then at Travis. Caleb! Caleb shoved Lowell to his knees and pointed. Stay there. He moved to secure Travis while Everett followed Omen. Maribel struck the gate with her shoulder. Omen paced outside the rails, keeping the mare's attention away from the smoke. He did not enter beneath her hooves. He barked, moved, and stopped, guiding her head toward the open side of the enclosure. Everett reached through the gate and cut the tangled tie with his utility knife. Maribel stumbled free. Omen backed away as the mare crossed into the snow. Behind them, Caleb drove the fire down with the second extinguisher. The flames were not out, but they were contained to one corner. Then headlights appeared on the road. Not the strobing lights of a patrol car. A dark sedan swept through the orchard gate far too fast, skidded sideways, and stopped near the farmhouse. Laurel stepped out before the passenger door had fully opened. For one terrible second, Everett thought fear had brought her back to the place she had escaped. Then Amos emerged behind her, clutching his cane and a small iron key. I remembered the strongbox, he called. Lydia's old records may still be under the sugar house floor. Travis heard him and smiled. Meredith Sloan came around the driver's side of the sedan, furious. I told both of you to remain in the vehicle. Amos held up the key. You also told us evidence matters. Not more than your lives. Laurel remained beside her father. She had insisted on coming because Amos could not remember which floor panel concealed the strongbox. only that his wife had once used the compartment for tax receipts. Meredith had agreed to drive them only after receiving the fire alert and believing the scene would already be secured. It was not. Travis drove his shoulder into Caleb, broke free, and ran toward Amos. "Give me the key." Amos raised his cane. Laurel stepped in front of him. Travis seized her left wrist. The grip landed exactly where the bruises had begun to fade. Laurel froze. Her body remembered before her mind did. Her shoulders folded. Her breath vanished. For a heartbeat, she was back inside the narrow pantry, staring at a wall while someone else decided when she could leave. Travis pulled her closer. "Key." Laurel looked past him. Omen stood near Maribel, one front paw lifted. The dog saw her. Something changed in his face. Not magic, not human understanding, but recognition of fear. Laurel forced air into her lungs. Then she shouted, "Everett!" The name tore out of her with more strength than she knew she had. Omen ran. He stopped between Laurel and Travis, broad chest squared, lips lifted enough to reveal teeth. A low growl vibrated from him, controlled and absolute. Travis released Laurel and swung a broken wooden slat toward the dog. Everett caught his forearm before the blow landed. He twisted the arm behind Travis's back and drove him to one knee. "Don't." The word came quietly. Travis struggled once. Everett tightened the hold. At the fence, Caleb stood over Lowell, one hand pressed against his injured knee. Lowell had not moved. Sirens rose beyond the trees. Erin Cole arrived first, patrol vehicle sliding to a controlled stop near the gate. She stepped out with her weapon held low, voice carrying across the yard. "Hands where I can see them. Everyone stay where you are." Lowell flattened both palms in the snow. Travis hesitated until Erin shifted her stance. Then he stopped fighting. Maeve and the volunteer fire crew arrived less than 2 minutes later. The firefighters attacked the remaining hot spots and pulled scorched boards away from the wall. The flames had burned through one rear section of the sugar house but had not reached the roof or the surrounding maples. Outside the gate, the black SUV began moving. Maeve saw it. She turned her vehicle across the road and blocked the exit. Vaughn stopped 10 feet from her bumper. He lowered his window and ordered. "I saw smoke," he said. "I came to help." Maeve looked toward the dark orchard road behind him. "You were parked there before the fire call." Vaughn's face remained calm. "I was concerned about my clients. You no longer have clients on this property." He lifted one shoulder. "I know nothing about what those men did." That might have remained plausible for several more hours. Then Erin recovered Lowell's phone. The call log showed repeated contact with Vaughn that evening. A message sent 23 minutes earlier read, "Get back what is ours. Do not leave the location useful tonight." Maeve read it once. Then she placed the phone in an evidence bag. "This does not answer every question," she told Vaughn, "but it gives me several new ones." Vaughn was detained pending further investigation. He did not resist. Men like him rarely believed the handcuffs were truly meant for them until the metal closed. Near the sugar house, Laurel knelt beside Omen. Blood marked the snow beneath his right front paw. During the rescue, a shard of broken glass had cut the pad. The wound was not deep, but Omen held the foot carefully above the ground. Laurel removed her scarf and wrapped it loosely around the injured paw until help arrived. Then she pressed her face into the thick fur at his neck. She cried loudly. Not the silent tears of the farmhouse kitchen. These were broken human sounds, fear, relief, rage, and grief leaving together. No one told her to be quiet. No one called her unstable. Everett rested one hand against Omen's shoulder. The dog remained still between them. When Lowell was placed in Erin's patrol vehicle, he turned before the door closed. His pale face had gone gray beneath the flashing lights. He looked at Laurel. "Calder has done this before," he said. Then his eyes moved toward Amos. "To more people than you know." The fire at Bellamy Maple Orchard changed the pace of everything. For 48 hours, Vaughn Calder remained in county custody, while Maeve Donnelly and the district attorney's office sought warrants for his vehicle, office, financial accounts, and electronic devices. Travis Kern was charged with burglary, attempted arson, assault, and destruction of evidence. Lowell Vick, pale and sleepless beneath the fluorescent lights of the interview room, asked for a lawyer and then offered to cooperate. He did not call himself innocent. He called himself afraid. Lowell explained that Vaughn rarely paid people directly. Work passed through maintenance companies, consulting firms, and temporary contractors. The tasks were described in language that looked harmless on invoices: site recovery, document retrieval, emergency property stabilization. Among the men Vaughn trusted, those jobs had another name, things that should never appear on paper. Lowell surrendered his phone and identified the disposable numbers Vaughn used. He described payments routed through a company registered in another state and admitted that Travis had been told to find Lydia Cross's notebook before destroying the sugar house. His testimony did not end the case. It opened the door through which the rest of the evidence could enter. The search of Vaughn's office took place 3 days later. Maeve supervised while Daniel Quist documented every drawer, computer, cabinet, and sealed envelope. Investigators recovered draft powers of attorney, profiles of elderly clients, maps of valuable rural properties, and contracts prepared under shell company names. A locked cabinet contained prescription receipts issued under false identities. One laptop had connected to the same office network used to alter Laurel's medical file. Technical analysts could not prove Vaughn's own hands had typed every entry, but they established that the changes originated from equipment under his company's control. Nolan Price traced the sedative's lot number to an out-of-state distributor. It had been purchased through a small medical supply account linked to one of Vaughn's intermediary companies. Dr. Celeste Harrow prepared a clinical report explaining how the drug could produce confusion, poor balance, slowed speech, and gaps in short-term memory. She was careful not to claim that medicine alone proved guilt. It proved method. The messages, payments, records, and witnesses would have to prove intent. Justice did not arrive like lightning. It arrived as appointments, motions, sealed exhibits, postponed hearings, and long afternoons beneath courthouse lights. Within 2 days of the fire, the court froze all transactions involving Bellamy Maple Orchard. Several weeks later, after a full independent assessment, Amos was declared legally capable of making decisions about his property, residence, and medical care. Vaughn's financial authority was suspended, then revoked. 3 months passed before the Bellamys regained control of their accounts. The criminal case took nearly 9 months. During that time, winter loosened its grip on North Star Valley. Snow melted from the southern slopes. Maple sap rose. Wildflowers appeared along the ditches. Then summer came, green and brief, followed by the first copper leaves of autumn. Laurel changed slowly with the seasons. Some mornings, she managed her medication without checking the label 3 times. Other mornings, the sight of a black SUV made her hands go cold. Omen's injured paw healed, but he continued to walk beside her whenever she entered a crowded building. At the courthouse, he could not accompany her into every room, so Everett waited with him beneath the old stone steps between sessions. The dog would sit facing the doors, Laurel said. Knowing he was outside made the walls feel less final. Gideon spent much of the summer searching for Lydia Cross. A storage unit payment in Wisconsin led to a forwarding address, then to a small town near Eau Claire. Lydia was living with her older sister in a yellow house behind a Lutheran church. When Gideon finally spoke with her, Lydia refused to return. Vaughn had threatened to report her son Evan for embezzlement. The accusation was false, but Evan worked for a bank and could lose his career before clearing his name. Lydia believed silence protected him. Laurel asked to call her. The conversation took place in Everett's kitchen. Lydia's voice came through the speaker, thin and strained. "I left you there," she said. "I knew something was wrong and I left." Laurel sat beside Omen, one hand resting between his ears. "You left enough for us to survive. That doesn't forgive me. I'm not calling to forgive you." The answer surprised everyone, including Laurel. She continued softly. "I'm calling because there may be other people who don't have a coat with evidence sewn inside. We need you to help them." Silence followed. Then Lydia began to cry. She agreed to testify. Before ending the call, Lydia revealed one detail she had never written down. Vaughn kept a blue ledger separate from the official books. It contained no client names, only symbols beside dates and property values. A circle meant the person had been isolated. A line meant control of medication or mail. A small black square meant the property was ready to transfer. Lydia remembered seeing 7 black squares. The Bellamy orchard had not been the first. It had merely been the next. The trial began in October. The courthouse stood at the edge of town, a square building of pale stone with tall windows and a bronze eagle above the entrance. Reporters gathered outside, drawn less by the Bellamy name than by the growing number of families who believed they recognized Vaughn's methods. Judge Evelyn Hart presided. At 64, Judge Hart was a compact woman with silver-white hair cut close around her face and dark eyes that rarely revealed approval or impatience. She had served as a public defender before joining the bench and had developed a reputation for allowing witnesses time to answer while granting lawyers very little time to perform. Her voice was quiet, forcing the courtroom to become quieter around her. Vaughn entered wearing a navy suit, white shirt, and muted burgundy tie. He appeared rested. His hair was combed back with the same precision as before. His expression carried neither guilt nor fear, only the calm injury of a man who believed accountability was a misunderstanding committed against him. Thomas Wren represented him. The defense argued that Vaughn had stepped into a chaotic family situation and made difficult decisions for people who could no longer manage safely. They described Laurel as medically unstable, Amos as vulnerable to influence, Lydia as a frightened former employee seeking immunity, and Lowell as a criminal bargaining for leniency. Meredith did not try the criminal case herself. The prosecution belonged to Assistant District Attorney Naomi Brooks. Naomi was 46, tall and spare, with deep brown skin, close-cropped natural hair, and a narrow face made striking by high cheekbones. She spoke without theatrical anger. Her younger brother had once lost his savings to a predatory guardian, an experience that taught Naomi how easily paperwork could disguise violence. She built cases patiently, preferring patterns to dramatic accusations. Meredith remained beside Amos and Laurel as their civil counsel and advocate. The prosecution began with records, bank statements, falsified invoices, altered medical logs, the unauthorized network access, the sedative purchase, the shell companies, the messages to Travis and Lowell. The blue ledger recovered from a locked drawer in Vaughn's office after Lydia identified it. Dr. Harrow explained how Laurel's symptoms aligned with the sedative found in her blood. Nolan explained the false prescription label and the route by which the drug had been obtained. The defense repeatedly emphasized that no single item proved the entire case. Naomi agreed. No single brick is a prison, she said, but walls are still made of bricks. Amos testified on the fourth day. He wore his chestnut wool coat until the bailiff asked him to remove it, then sat in his charcoal vest with both hands resting on the head of his maple cane. Thomas Wren asked whether Amos forgot appointments. Sometimes. Dates? Yes. Instructions? When people speak too quickly, then you accept that you need help. Amos looked toward the jury. I accept that I am old. Wren waited. Amos continued. I need someone to repeat a question sometimes. I need help carrying feed. I need my daughter to remind me where I put my glasses. His pale eyes moved to Vaughn. But needing help does not mean needing an owner. The courtroom remained silent. Laurel testified the following morning. She did not pretend courage had erased fear. Her hands shook when she took the oath. She admitted there were hours she could not remember. She admitted she had once believed Vaughn's account more than her own mind. Wren stood before her. So you cannot testify with certainty about every event? No. You cannot tell this jury exactly who placed each pill in your container? No. You cannot even remember every occasion on which you were supposedly restrained? Laurel swallowed. No. Wren turned toward the jury, but Laurel spoke again. What I do not remember does not erase what exists. He looked back. The blood test exists. The false label exists. The clinic log exists. The locks exist. The recordings exist. The bruises existed. Her voice trembled. So does my fear. But fear is not proof that I am confused. Sometimes it is proof that I learned what a person was capable of. Outside the courtroom, Omen raised his head as though he had heard her through the stone. Lydia testified last. She was 54, shorter than Laurel had imagined, with a narrow frame, shoulder-length, gray-brown hair, and a face lined by months of poor sleep. She wore a simple blue dress and clasped her hands tightly enough to whiten the knuckles. Lydia described Vaughn's system. He identified older clients with property, limited nearby family, medical vulnerabilities, or recent financial setbacks. He first made himself useful, then necessary, then unavoidable. He redirected mail, created fees, suggested medical evaluations, encouraged relatives to accept temporary authority. When clients resisted, he documented resistance as confusion. The blue ledger tracked progress. Lydia admitted she had helped prepare documents before understanding the pattern. Then she admitted she had understood and remained too long. I was afraid, she said. Naomi asked, why are you here now? Lydia looked at Laurel. Because she was afraid too, and she still stood up. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Vaughn was found guilty of financial exploitation of vulnerable adults, fraud, forgery, unlawful access to medical records, coercion, conspiracy to commit arson, and obstruction of justice. Separate civil rulings voided the road access and groundwater agreements. Bellamy Maple Orchard returned fully to Amos and Laurel, free of Vaughn's management claims. When the verdict was read, Vaughn's expression barely changed. Only his right hand tightened against the defense table. The man who had controlled lives through paper was led away beneath the authority of a document he could not rewrite. Outside the courthouse, autumn leaves moved across the steps. Amos stood beside Laurel, with his cane planted firmly before him. Everett and Omen waited near the railing. For months, people had asked Amos when he planned to return home. He did not ask that question. Instead, he turned to his daughter. "What do you want that house to become?" Amos and Laurel did not return to Bellamy Maple Orchard after the trial. Not immediately. The law had restored the property to them, but a court order could not remove the memory of a locked door, a mislabeled bottle, or a voice that had taught Laurel to distrust her own mind. The farmhouse belonged to them again on paper. In her body, it still belonged to fear, so they remained at Northglass Farm through the winter. The arrangement began as something temporary. Amos slept in the small room beside the kitchen because the stairs troubled his knees. Laurel occupied the guest room at the end of the hallway. Everett moved his late brother's boxes from the closet and placed them in the workshop without opening them. No one announced that the stay had become longer. They simply stopped discussing departure dates. Healing entered the house in small, almost unnoticeable ways. At first, Laurel woke whenever tires moved along the road. She would sit upright in the dark, heart racing, waiting for a door to open downstairs. Omen slept directly outside her room during those early weeks. His black and honey body stretched across the threshold. He did not scratch at the door. He did not demand to enter. He stayed where she could hear him breathe. Later, he began sleeping farther down the hallway, then beside the stove. One morning, when the March sunlight finally carried warmth, Laurel found him lying alone on the front porch, amber eyes half closed, his torn right ear relaxed in the sun. She stood behind the screen door and watched him. Omen had not abandoned his post. He had decided there was no longer a post to guard. The realization hurt Laurel in a gentle place. For months, the dog had measured danger more honestly than she could. Now his distance offered something she had not expected: trust. She opened the door and sat beside him on the porch steps. Omen lifted his head, examined her face, and placed his chin across one honey-colored paw. "You think I'm all right," she whispered. The tail struck the wood once. It was not an answer. It was enough. Under Dr. Celeste Harrow's supervision, Laurel began managing her own medication again. Nolan Price prepared every prescription in clearly labeled bottles and printed a large schedule she could check without shame. At first, she telephoned the pharmacy each morning to confirm the color and shape of every tablet. Nolan never rushed her. By spring, she called only when something actually changed. She also telephoned the bank herself. The first time, Everett found her at the kitchen table, with both hands wrapped around the receiver. She had written every question in advance, then crossed them out one by one. When the call ended, she sat without moving. "Bad news?" Everett asked. Laurel shook her head. "No, they listened." The simplicity of it nearly broke her. Amos found his own medicine in work. He could no longer lift fence rails the way he once had, but he understood wood better than anyone Everett knew. He began repairing the south gate, shaving each joint with an old hand plane until the pieces met without strain. Caleb Dunn watched him spend 3 days on a hinge post that could have been replaced in an afternoon. "You know they sell metal brackets for that," Caleb said. Amos did not look up. "They also sell soup in cans. That doesn't mean a person should serve it to guests." Caleb laughed. 3 days for one gate. Amos tested the joint with both hands. "It will last longer than you." The humor returned carefully after that. Not the loud laughter of people who had forgotten suffering, but the quieter kind that checked the room first and then decided it was safe to stay. Everett began hearing it while he repaired tack in the barn. Sometimes the sound startled him. Northglass Farm had been silent for so long that happiness seemed at first like another unfamiliar animal wandering onto the property. Laurel took over the small greenhouse behind the workshop. The structure had once belonged to Everett's mother, though for years it held only cracked pots, rusted tools, and a bench covered in dust. Laurel cleared the shelves and washed the clouded glass. She planted lavender, calendula, rosemary, red geraniums, and a row of young maple seedlings. The maple trees were Amos's idea. "For the eastern grove," he said. "Those trees will outlive all of us," Laurel replied. "That's the point." She also began baking from her mother's recipes. The first batch of maple waffles came out too dark around the edges. The second batch stuck to the iron. By the third Sunday, the kitchen smelled of butter, cinnamon, and warm syrup. Omen lay near the stove, eyes closed. Whenever Laurel carried a plate past him, one amber eye opened. Everett pointed at the dog. "He's awake." Laurel looked down. Omen immediately closed the eye. "He looks asleep to me. He's conducting surveillance. For waffles? National security." Amos slid a small piece beneath the table. Everett caught him. "That dog has survived search operations and a structure fire. You're going to finish him with butter." Amos showed no regret. Every soldier deserves a pension. One afternoon, Laurel entered the greenhouse and found Omen sitting before the tray of maple seedlings. The dog was not looking at the plants. He was staring at the old green coat hanging from a wall hook, the same coat that had carried Lydia's hidden memory card through the storm. Laurel approached slowly. For a moment, she expected the sight of it to pull her backward. Instead, she took the coat down, removed the frayed green ribbon from her hair, and tied the ribbon around the strongest maple seedling. Then she carried the coat to the workbench. She did not burn it. She did not hide it. She cut the undamaged fabric into small squares for a winter quilt. Some things, she understood, did not have to remain evidence forever. They could become warmth. 1 year after the trial, Bellamy Maple Orchard began to breathe again. The farmhouse roof was repaired. The cameras and exterior locks were removed. The pantry beside the kitchen was opened permanently, its door taken off the hinges and replaced with wide shelves filled with flour, preserves, tea, and baking supplies. The burned section of the sugar house was rebuilt using salvaged timber where possible. Amos insisted that one blackened beam remain visible above the entrance. "People should know it burned," he said, "and that it remained standing." The restoration did not happen through courage alone. Insurance claims took months. Civil settlements moved slowly. The orchard needed safety inspections, accessibility improvements, and new electrical wiring. Meredith made certain every agreement was reviewed independently. Ruth warned them against trying to become counselors simply because they had survived harm. That was how Northern Lantern Senior Advocacy became involved. The nonprofit had operated across northern Minnesota for 11 years, helping older adults facing financial exploitation, isolation, coercive guardianship, and unsafe living conditions. Its director, Helen Marrow, was 60, tall and broad-framed, with silver curls worn loose around a square, kind face. Her dark blue eyes carried the calm authority of someone who had spent years listening to people apologize for needing help. Helen dressed plainly in wool trousers, thick sweaters, and practical boots. Her mother had lost a home to a fraudulent reverse mortgage scheme, and the experience had taught Helen that shame often protected thieves better than locked doors did. She visited Bellamy Orchard 3 times before agreeing to a partnership. "This cannot be a place where frightened people are rescued by whoever happens to own the house," she said. "It needs policies, insurance, trained staff, background checks, and somewhere to refer people when their needs exceed what you can provide." Amos looked at Meredith. "She sounds like you." Meredith closed her notebook. "That is why I like her." Northern Lantern handled licensing, insurance, staffing, intake procedures, and professional referrals. The Bellamys provided the land. Laurel provided the vision. They named the place the Open Gatehouse. It was not a large shelter. There was one private consultation room, a weekly support circle, a telephone referral line, and one emergency bedroom managed through Northern Lantern's license program. A long maple table stood in the main room, built by Amos and Everett from storm-fallen wood. No forms were placed on the table before visitors had eaten. No one was asked to sign anything without explanation. Meredith held free legal consultations once a month. Dr. Harrow and Nolan organized medication reviews. Ruth taught families how to recognize coercive control and guardianship abuse. Gideon volunteered 2 Saturdays each month, examining suspicious invoices and property documents while complaining about the quality of the coffee. Everett restored the abandoned livestock barn at Northglass Farm, but not for people. It became a recovery space for neglected horses, with insulated stalls, safer gates, and wide windows facing east. The old workers' cottage was renovated as temporary housing through Northern Lantern's licensed network. It had a small kitchen, 2 beds, and a front door whose lock could only be controlled from the inside. That detail mattered to Laurel. The beginning and the ending stood opposite each other like 2 gates. On the first night, Amos and Laurel had asked to sleep beside livestock because they believed shelter was more than they deserved. Now they had helped build a place where frightened people entered through the front door. spring returned to North Star Valley. Sap moved through the maples and collected in metal buckets that flashed beneath the sunlight. Snow withdrew from the fence lines, revealing wet earth and the first stubborn grass. The rebuilt sugar house sent a thin ribbon of sweet smoke into the morning sky. Everett and Amos stood near the road, raising a carved wooden sign between two stone posts. Amos directed every adjustment while doing none of the lifting. Left side is low. Everett checked the level. It isn't. My eye says it is. Your eye is 82 years old. My eye built this place. Everett shifted the sign half an inch. Amos nodded. Perfect. Omen sat near Laurel at the open gate. Silver had spread farther across his muzzle, but his posture remained steady. The pale flame on his chest bright in the spring sun. A sedan stopped along the road. An elderly woman stepped out but did not approach. Her name was Evelyn Marsh, 74, a retired school cafeteria worker with a small, rounded body, soft white hair beneath a lavender knit cap, and frightened blue eyes. She clutched a canvas handbag against her chest as though it contained the last pieces of her life. Helen Merrill had told Laurel that Evelyn's nephew had begun controlling her pension and opening her mail. Evelyn stood beyond the gate. "I'm sorry," she called. "I may have the wrong place." Laurel walked toward her. Omen rose and followed, then stopped several feet away, turning his body slightly to give Evelyn space. The same courtesy he had once given Laurel. Evelyn looked toward the house. "I don't want to be a burden." Laurel remembered wet gloves, a frozen road, and the shame of asking to sleep in a barn. She opened the gate wider. "You're not a burden," she said. "You just arrived at the right place a little late." Evelyn's mouth trembled. Then she stepped forward. Behind them, Everett and Amos secured the wooden sign. The open gatehouse Omen watched the road for a moment longer. Then the German shepherd lowered himself into the sunlight. This time, he sensed no approaching danger, only another person finding the road back to her own life. Sometimes a miracle does not arrive with thunder, bright light, or a voice from heaven. Sometimes it arrives as a door left open during a storm. Sometimes it looks like an old soldier who refuses to turn away, a faithful dog who senses fear before anyone speaks, or a stranger who chooses to listen when the rest of the world has already made up its mind. The story of Everett, Omen, Amos, and Laurel reminds us that needing help does not make a person weak, and growing older does not make anyone less worthy of dignity, safety, or the right to choose their own life. There may be someone around us carrying pain behind a polite smile. It could be an elderly neighbor, a quiet friend, a tired parent, or someone in our own family who has slowly been made to believe that their voice no longer matters. We may not be able to solve every problem, but we can notice, we can listen, we can ask one more question. We can stand beside someone long enough for them to remember that they are not alone. Perhaps that is how God often works in ordinary life. Not by removing every storm, but by placing the right person, the right animal, or the right open door along the road. And perhaps the greatest miracle is not being carried forever. Perhaps it is being given a safe place to rest until we are strong enough to stand again. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need hope today. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from and what lesson you will carry with you from this story. Subscribe to the channel for more stories about courage, loyalty, faith, and second chances. May God bless you, protect your family, bring peace to your home, and give you the wisdom to recognize those who need kindness most. And when someone stands uncertain outside your gate, may God give you the courage to open the door.